So what we're going to do today is actually dive into Substance Alchemist, another application part of the Substance suite. So we've spent a lot of time in Painter. We spent just a glint of that in Designer. Now we're in Alchemist. So we've pretty much covered the entire library of applications. Now, each application does have its, pros and cons, what they're used for, but they're all capable of kind of generating textures in some way. What makes Alchemist special is its ability to generate textures using bitmap images and how we can actually modify those. So right now I don't really have anything in the scene right now. This is just a really simple setup. But let's just kind of start off slow and just show you what I'm talking about. So essentially what I'm going to be able to do is bring in an image, and whatever image I bring in, I'm going to be able to generate a material. Right, so before in Painter, we were painting it using presets, or we were finding textures online and kind of building it and kind of sculpting it, if you will. Or in Designer, we were kind of building it from scratch using a node-based kind of compositing style. Here, it's basically we start with an image, we make adjustments, and we build something from that. All right, so Alchemist is a pretty straightforward application. There's not a whole lot like in the way of like interface and tools, which is nice because you guys have been learning a lot of different software over the month, and the last thing we want to do is pick up another application that is as complex as Maya or ZBrush. This is not the case, I promise you. And you've probably kind of gotten used to Painter now. You can look at it objectively like, it's really not that complex. It's powerful, and yeah, some of the techniques get a little complicated, but it's not an overwhelming application. At least I hope you guys feel that way. I really don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed with it. Maybe a little. So what we're going to do is we're going to start a new project in Alchemist. So understanding the interface here is going to be important. So what we're going to do is we're just going to essentially create a new project. This is going to essentially create a folder that we can store additional materials in and do things with. All right, so we'll just name this BSD Alchemist lecture. No description or author needed. And we're going to be using the PBR workflow. So there are two typical workflows when you see PBR spec gloss. Typically, we don't even have to worry about that because we can always convert it out, but this is going to be fine right here. So now we have our little folder here. You can see there's nothing actually within it. So we just essentially have like a blank canvas. So let's go ahead and kind of explore the interface. So on the left, we have a little toolbar. We have resources, we have viewer settings, and channel settings. So if I go to my resources, we have a bunch of like starting materials. These are great for kind of experimentation. So what I can do is I can like drag these into the scene, which I can drag it here to the shelf, and then I can click on it. And what it should do is allow me to kind of preview these. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm just adding to the collection. This isn't modifying it anyway. Essentially, I'm just kind of reusing it. Now, once I do have it selected, I can now make modifications based off what attributes were exposed at the time the artist created this particular material. So similar to Designer, these sliders could be created within that application, right? By default, height should be enabled when you're in this application. So what I can do is actually kind of increase the quality of my displacement and the amplitude. So I can actually displace geometry from the surface, which is incredibly powerful, right? We've already kind of experienced this. Now, we haven't been doing this in Painter specifically because it does complicate the process when we take it back into RenderMan, but you could. It's been there. It's called tessellation. We can export a displacement map, and we can actually physically displace geometry from our meshes back in Maya. And it's a great way to get a very organic surface, right? Camera controls are going to be just like you're expecting it. Shift right click, right? So we can rotate the environment. We can also load in various local files. So if I wanted to add my own custom materials, which in this case I have, I'm going to go ahead and add this down here. And so if I were to kind of swap this out, this probably looks familiar, right? So this is actually what we've kind of created. So I'll show you some cool things we can do with existing information. So I've actually went ahead and modified this a little bit further. I've exposed some different parameters. So I've enabled like a hole punch. So if I want to like not punch out the bottom, I can do that. It's just now a simple toggle. Or if I want to kind of control the sides, I can actually just modify that on the fly. So just some simple sliders there to kind of play with. Furthermore, we can launch additional substance source. So I don't think this is going to work right now because I'm not logged in. But we're not going to worry about that. So if you wanted to load in additional materials, you can absolutely do that. Now, these are materials, right? These are not like bitmaps or anything. These are full-fledged materials. And we can mix and match. We can blend these together. We can do all kinds of crazy things with this. And Alchemist will allow us to do that. So let's jump on over to the viewer settings. We have the global parameters. This is going to set the resolution of the actual document, or at least how we're kind of previewing it over here. So if I wanted to bump that up to, say, 4K, I can absolutely do that. And you can see we're getting a lot more fidelity in the texture work. Probably easier to see it with the Cliff Rock. Let that load real quick. So again, if I kind of drop that to, say, maybe 128, looks beautiful. This is great for a mobile title now. Actually, I don't even think they need to go that low anymore. I think even 512 becomes suitable. But 4K, really nice, sharp and crisp. And it will up the resolution. So because this is not just an image, this is an entire Substance package, everything updates. Everything looks better, right? Which is great. I'm going to leave this at 2K. We can enable tiling. So what we can do is actually see what the tiling is going to look like. So if I did a 2x2, you can see that this particular texture is tileable, right? So we can actually repeat this quite a bit. Now there's another way we can access this. It's down here. You can see this will change as we change it. I'm just going to leave this by 1x1 for now, but we will explore this here in a little bit. Environment, we can obviously change the environment. So if you want to see what it looks like in a different light setup, these are just, again, HDRs, nothing out of the ordinary you haven't used yet, but it's a great way to kind of visualize your work. Now, by default, I believe this is set to off. I'm just going to leave it off. I don't necessarily need to see the background, but you know, again, holding shift and right click dragging will rotate. And then of course we have exposure controls. We could also change the mesh here. I kind of skipped over that one. But if you want to do like a cube or a rounded cylinder or something like that, this is a great way to kind of preview your textures in different scenarios as well. So the ones I use the most commonly is going to be the rounded cube. I think this is kind of a good example to see how it looks when it reaches an edge, or just simply a plane. But again, it's really up to you. Camera adjustments, so if you want to just change the camera, and finally shader adjustments. So this is where you can kind of control displacement, amplitude, and displacement quality, but that can also be accessed down here in the viewer. And then finally, just displacement type. So right now we are using tessellation, which is important. So if I turn that off, it'll be completely flat. So we definitely do want that to help us kind of see our texture work. Shadows can be enabled. Right, so if I turn that on, you'll see it kind of, let me go ahead and kick up the intensity here. So the shadow computation, obviously if I move the camera, you'll see it kind of changes, and then if I let go, it's going to recompute, and you'll see the shadows kind of kick in a little bit. But for the sake of speed, I typically turn that off, and you can kind of see what that's doing here. Let me get a better environment here. Where are you, environment? Here we are. So now you can see the shadows a little bit more obvious. So again, if I rotate this, the shadows will change, and this will give us a good kind of expectation of what we're going to see. All right. But again, depending on your hardware, that'll either be pretty fast or pretty slow. All right. Channel settings, these are the channels we're working with, so we can turn them on and off. Typically, you won't need to go in here for any particular reason, but if you wanted to, you could turn off base color. I don't know why you would, but you can. All right, so like that's pretty much a good chunk of the controls over here. Now you might have noticed these little tabs up here. We have Explore, Create, Inspire, and Manage. Explore just kind of allows us to explore the various materials. So when I kind of click on these, they load in, we see what they look like. So if I wanted to bring in, say, this slate and take a look at this, I can kind of observe what this is doing. If I go to Create, this is going to allow me to kind of change it up. So what I can do is actually drag and drop various materials into the Create, and now I can add, essentially, what we have here is a layer stack. So what I can do now is kind of do some pretty crazy things. I can add filters. So We can add layers. These layers have very specific tasks. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about these, but it's pretty simple. So for instance, if I wanted to add dirt, it's as simple as that. I've added dirt to my material. And I can still go back a layer and I can disable these other channels, right? I can go back and make adjustments to my material. I can make adjustments to the scaling. So like the amplitude here, I can make that a bit more subtle. So already I'm starting to get a really cool effect, right? If I wanted to add like another channel, I could absolutely do that. I can do something like maybe a dust. And what the dust is going to do is going to treat it a little bit differently. So that's just going to build another dust layer. And I do have the quantity control. I have controls on how to kind of affect like the volume here. And already we've gotten some pretty cool results. If I like turn these layers off, this is what we started with, right? This is what we built in Designer. Now I can just do all of this, and now I have some modifications that look very, very organic, and I can take this back into Painter and use that as my new texture. In fact, when I'm ready, I can actually save this material. We'll call this Dirty Rubber Mat. It's going to save it into our new collection here, which I guess that's not using the new name. That's nice. And there it is, right? So I can always go back. So if I go back to explore here, I can always go back to this initial material. I've never lost it. And then I can go over and now view the new material that we've created. And I can still modify this too. So I don't lose the ability to make changes. That layer stack is still there. So to me, this is already like, oh boy, now we can do some pretty crazy things, right? We can start scuffing up existing materials. We haven't even created a material yet. We're modifying existing data to make them more appealing. So now I can give my artist two different variations. I can give them a clean and a roughed up dirty version. Now, again, we can still kind of do this in Painter, right? But it's a different challenge. It's a different process. Excuse me. So now if we go over to the Inspire tab, what this allows me to do is kind of create some different variations or inspirations, if you will. So right now it allows me to simply just drag an image. So if I were to jump on Google and search for, I don't know, trees, let's go ahead and just save an image. I'm going to grab this image. Looks cool. Let's just view image. We'll save it, and let's go ahead and save it on desktop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load that image in. So what it's going to do, it's going to pull some various color information from this image. Now I can change the parameters here, how it's kind of pulling the colors, how many colors it pulls. I can do like by lightness, by darkness, right? So it's pulling the dark colors, the median. And what I can do is I can generate a variation of my material. And I get a completely different look. Now, whether or not that looks good, in this case, not quite, right? It is a potential, right? And what I can do is kind of save that variation as another variation my artists can use. So let's try changing this up a little bit, maybe kind of a different color scheme here. I don't know if I really want all that blue in there. So we'll do, let's try, well, brightness. Let's go with the darkness then. And let's do another variation. So essentially it's remapping all the colors, and take a look at that. That actually looks kind of nice. Now it's like a grungy, almost metal material, and it's pulling all of that information from that texture. And so now, again, if I'm happy with this, I can just drag and drop this, and now I have another collection, all right? And I can make modifications to this as well, right? So if I go to create and I drag this one over, I can make modifications. In fact, I can blend this with my existing material. Do some pretty crazy things with that. All right. So hopefully you kind of see some pretty cool stuff already with, you know, this application. I think this would be kind of a great one to teach earlier on. It's kind of something I'm looking forward to maybe implementing here soon. Just have to find the right spot for it. But this is an application you guys as artists can use at any time in the future to make your textures, right? So take advantage of it. It's really, really powerful. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that guy. I don't care for him. But let's go ahead and explore something else here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this slate here, And we're going to make some modifications to this. So we're going to explore some of the filters and the resources in here and just see what we can do. So I'm going to go to the Create tab. You're going to see we now have a new option here called Filters. And we're going to go ahead and load in our slate. So let's just go ahead and actually let's go back. We'll load this in once it's ready. All right, we'll just clear it out. So that button right there will start a new material. So there we are. So now we're starting fresh. So we've got this slate here. Looks pretty good by default. And it's just a tileable texture. So now if I go up here, I do have like 2D, 3D view. I can do a 2D/3D view. Again, this one comes with all of the information already included. So let's make some cool little changes with this. I'm just going to work in the 3D view for now. That'll be sufficient. Let's open up our filters and let's just kind of explore what we have here. So if I look at the generators, scan processing, the tools, there's a lot of stuff here. And they all have like very specific functionality. But something like brick wall pattern or pavement pattern, let's just see what that does. So what I'm going to do is just drag one of these onto the actual material. So I'm going to take that stone wall and drop it on there. Take a look at what happened. It actually generated a stone wall based off the slate, right? The slate is actually generating that detail. Or if I don't like that one, we can delete that. We can try something else. We can try, let's see what else we have in here. Pavement pattern. Take a look at that. And this is a tileable texture, right? So if I go down here and I enable tiling, you'll see it tiles perfectly. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that again at 1 and 1 just for the sake of visibility. But look at all the settings we have here. We can do so much with this. So if I wanted to change this type here, maybe basket weave, right? I get a completely different look. Or if I want to do fender weave, flander weave, that's cool. Diamond tile, right? Sure, let's go with that. And you can notice if you look closely, it's actually, these are essentially, it's rotating the texture too in certain areas. Actually, it's not, but let's see, is it? It should. Sometimes what it'll do is it will kind of reorient the texture. So depending on which one you have in there, it'll look very organic because it's essentially doing a directional warp. I bet you there would be an intensity for that. But let's just take a look at some of the settings here. We have brick spacing. So I want to kind of create a little bit more space between that. Corner around this. So if I want nice soft corners, we can do that. Make it look very worn. Edge around this. That's kind of nice right there. Tilt intensity. So again, if I want, let's take that displacement amplitude up. This is generating height information. And if I take that tilt intensity, I can have the tiles kind of break up even more. Right? Joint width, let's play with that. Kind of get it right around there probably. But we have a lot of controls. Then we also have surface smoothness. If I kind of bring this down, it's going to kind of bring back some of that rock detail, and I can make it feel a lot more organic. So this, I love this. I mean, to me, this is really cool. Like just being able to do this so quickly and easily and having a nice tileable texture is awesome. All right, but it gets better. Oh, it gets better. So let's kind of beaten this up a little bit, shall we? So we have our filter. Again, we can apply other filters. So we have things like, let's go ahead and collapse this. I don't need a finish on there. So we're going to take a look at some of the tools and the weathering. So weathering really is going to be what we want to kind of play with. So we have things like corrosion. Atlas scatter is kind of a cool one. You can like splatter different textures and imagine kind of splattering rocks or debris across the surface. So let's do some moss splatter. Let's actually have some grass kind of growing on this. So I'm going to stack this on top. And now we start to get moss kind of growing in based off the height. So it's growing from the bottom. I can have it go from the top. I'm probably just going to leave it there. Kind of decrease that spread a little bit. and then kind of play with the scale. So if I want large grass blades or small, now I can change the moss color, right? So if I want this to be a little bit darker or a little bit more green, a little bit more saturated, you can absolutely do that. I think I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And again, we're just kind of building it up. Moss elevation, let's see, can we tone that down a little bit so it's not looking like it's just bulging up there. Prevent edge on growth. I kind of like it on the edges there, so cool. Let's add another one. Let's do some dirt. Throw that on there. And so now I get dirt kind of building up. And now what I can do is kind of increase the quantity. This is kind of like a multiply effect where it is kind of darkening, but you know what? Maybe I'm not really feeling that dirt. Maybe I want to like blend in another material. So right now we're just using filter. So let's delete that. Let's find an actual resource that we can use. So if I kind of go back and look at our resources here, let's see what kind of presets we have. We have a mud here we could potentially use. Rock, carpet. Carpet probably wouldn't look too good. Let's go with that mud. So I'm just going to drag this, put it in our layer stack. And by default, it's going to blend it in via height, which is fine, right? Let's go ahead and adjust the technical parameters. I'm going to take that height range of that mud down here a little bit, just kind of flatten that out. They had some really strong peaks. And what I can also do is just kind of blend it. So clicking on this will allow me to adjust the offset. So I can have the dirt kind of come up through here. And then let's kind of play with the contrast maybe a little bit. Yeah, we can match the color a little bit, kind of blend that a bit better. And now we have dirt, another material actually blending in through the rocks, right? So, and again, I can still just play with like how the height, how the interactions here, it's silly, right? Because I can do so much with this. So if I want even more dirt to kind of blend in right there, that might be kind of nice. And I could probably reorient the moss, put that on top and make sure it kind of builds up a little bit better. Now it's kind of using the new height information, so it's kind of changed the way it's looking. So I can definitely change the spread here and lower that quite a bit. Let's take that back. There we are. And there we go, right? Now let's go ahead and add another layer, right? So I kind of like that dirt filter. I think it kind of gave it some nice variation, so we'll leave that on there. It just kind of darkens everything, kind of blends it nicely. One of my favorites here is actually the water. This one's gonna blow your mind. So if I put the water on there, I can get a water. I mean, look at this, come on. Really? It looks so good. Water level, I can just simply adjust it based off the height map. So if I want just a little bit of water coming in, I mean, come on. I can control the edge wetness, so this is how it blends along the edge. I can make this like dirty water. It already is kind of like dirty water. But there we go. We now have a preset for something like this, right? So we have our dirt mixing in. We have the moss and the cobblestone. And we can go back to originally what we started with, which is all the way down here. We started with this, right? Just some simple slate. And then we just kind of layered in these effects. So let's say we're happy with that. And we're ready to kind of save that out. Cool. Let's save it. We'll call this wet cobblestone. And I'll add it to our collection there. Right. Let's make another modification. I'm going to add some snow because we can. I can have the snow blend in. I can have melted snow here. And the water still kind of goes in there. Now that probably doesn't look too good there, but I wonder if we just turn the water off. Yeah, I don't know about that. There we go. We have a snow variant. Let's add a little bit more. It's that melted snow. There we go. We'll just kind of keep that at 0. We'll save out that collection. Save as. We'll call this cobblestone stone, snow. And now we have 2 variations. So we could give this to our artist. And again, did I mention this tiles? Because it does. And it'll look just fine. Love it. So again, this is how we can kind of modify materials with existing data. So if we built our materials in Designer, we can come in here we downloaded various materials from online. We can come in here and modify them, add some detail, add some wear, and get pretty crazy. Like a lot of these things do some pretty nice effects, right? But that's not the only thing here. Again, I want to really kind of talk about is how we can generate bitmap information to a material. So when I say bitmap, typically what that just means, it's just an image. So I've gone ahead and downloaded some images right here. And I think we're going to go ahead and try to convert this one. Now, the best thing you can do is to find super high resolution imagery. So this one isn't too high res, unfortunately. It's only 870 by 1200, but the bigger the better, right? So it's just going to make a world of difference when it comes to your texture work, because we can always go down. We can't go up. We can't, well, I take that back now with like AI upscaling. That stuff is pretty impressive nowadays too. But for our purposes, it's you never want to go up, because essentially what we're doing is generating information that doesn't exist. It's going to look very pixelated. So let's go ahead and clear this material. So we're just going to do a new material here. Again, we didn't lose any of this information. We can always go back. We can load that in there. You can see it's there, right? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image and I'm going to drag and drop it right here. And it's going to give me a prompt. Now I can go straight to bitmap to material. It's going to generate a material based off the information I give it. But you notice the image I was bringing in isn't exactly square. So what we're going to do, we're going to have to do a little prep. Some pre-processing, if you will. We have to kind of clean it up before we kind of start modifying. Now we could go straight into it, but that's not going to give you the best result. So we're going to just use as bitmap for now. Now we won't be able to see it in the 3D view because right now it's just essentially a 2D texture. So if I go to our 2D view and look at our scan 1 data, there is our original image, right? There's the dimensions. And this is what we're working with. So right now there is no real base color, normal, roughness, metallic. We haven't converted it to an actual material yet. All right. So we're going to go ahead and do some cleanup. So first things first, let's make this square, right? Because right now this is not square. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a layer. We're going to search for the crop tool. We're going to drop that on there. Now it's pulling a resolution of 4096 for the input size. What I want to do is actually match the input size of this right here, 870 by 1200. So I'll do 870 by 1200, and we'll turn that back on. Oops, I went to, there we go. This is going to make sure our document is nice and square and we are set up. So it's essentially remapping this. Now, we are losing some data. We cropped it out, right? So that's going to be unavoidable. I can move this around, kind of get a different position of the view and kind of play with that. Now, fortunately with this image, the lighting is good. I don't really see too many complications with the lighting, but sometimes if you look, if you do like a, I don't know, wood texture or something like that, what ends up happening is you'll get an image like this that has like a lot of lighting encoded into it. And it's our job to remove that lighting information, because when it tiles, you're going to see that repetition pretty easily. So what I can do is hit T to see what my tiling looks like. It does have a little bit of lighting issues here. Really, it's just kind of probably a value difference. There's better ways we can blend this, but we can try to essentially fix up the lighting information. So there is a node or a filter called Equalize, the equalizer, that will kind of balance all the lighting. In fact, it fixed that problem for us. It just went ahead and just fixed it, right? It balances your highlights, it balances your shadows, and makes it a lot more tileable, right? So again, without it, we get that problem there. So turning it on and off. This is going to tile very nicely, actually. We do have other controls, so if you need to kind of adjust the radius, that doesn't look too hot. So you have to find like that sweet spot to get it to look nice. All right, so that should be your goal when taking a bitmap in. You want to, again, make sure the image is square, and you want to try to make sure this is evenly lit. This is going to be super important that you do this at this stage. Now, it isn't seamless, because if we look closely, you can see there are some seams down here. We can fix that here in a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and now do the bitmap to material conversion. So bitmap to material, we'll go ahead and load that in. We'll give that a couple seconds, and let's go look at our 3D view. That looks great. Super, super chunky. Now again, I can go ahead and lower my amplitude and put that within reasonable range. Now you can see the texture is kind of falling short. It is kind of chunky here. And again, that's just the limitations of the resolution I'm working with. Since we started with a 1200, there's not a whole lot I can do. Now what I can do is I can kind of embed, we'll do like an adjustment here, where we can like tile this and then adjust it. So I'm not gonna worry about that just yet. But this is just kind of what we're working with. So I do get height information. I get normal. So again, if I go to my 2D view, you can look down here, base color, normal is now being generated, roughness, metallic, height. So the height's a bit chunky. So what we can do is go into our height parameters here and start to kind of control it. So if I want to kind of play with the like large detail here, if I want to make that a bit more subdued, and just kind of rely on some of the medium details here, maybe something like that, get the small details looking a little stronger. That might look a lot better. So if I go back to my 3D view, it's there. Ambient occlusion, definitely very strong. So we're gonna pull that back a lot. And then my range here. So I have to still kind of adjust the height scale. I'm gonna make that even more subtle. So let's do like 0.05. So what it's doing is actually looking at the color, the value to kind of determine height, right? So let's do a little bit stronger. So right now it's doing a luminance base. So it's assuming that it is a overcast day when you take the image. So that's the best thing you can do when taking textures or images of your textures. You want to do it on a day that has no direct sunlight. You don't want to see a lot of harsh shadows and highlights. Now we did remove the highlights, right? We did equalize the image, but sometimes, I mean, you want to start with the best image you can and not try to fix it in post, if you will. So there we go. So we've kind of started it, right? We've built this up a little bit. If we needed to invert the height here, we could absolutely do that as well. We can have it just kind of flip. I think it's going to be fine as is. Let's kind of, yeah, I definitely want that to be a lot more subtle. We should be able to see like the normal information is a bit strong. I'm not going to worry about the roughness here. We're going to come back to that. We can layer in additional details. Not 2.2. My numpad not working? All right, so let's go ahead and look at the tiling. So we want to make sure this is going to tile proper. So I'm going to add, so right now, this is one way we can tile it, right? So if I tile this, you can see that there is some repeating areas that we want to kind of concern ourselves. One, we have this visible seam here. So that is going to be problematic. We really don't want to kind of do that to ourselves. So we're going to go ahead and set this back to 1 and 1. I'm going to add a tiling filter. I love this. Make it tile. That's what it's called. I just want tiling though. And so it's going to do that, right? So we do, again, it kind of loses a bit of information when it does this. The best way we can see this is by looking at the height channel, which probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense because these are so similar. But if I kind of zoom in here and I look, you can kind of see what it's doing. So we have a couple things. The threshold here is really how it's kind of handling this. So if I set the threshold to 1, you can see that hard line right here. And if I kind of blend that threshold down, it's using an algorithm to kind of blend it, right? And that's trying its best. Now what I can do is kind of increase the grid resolution to kind of up the fidelity, right? And then I can also blur this to kind of blend it all together. And now if I kind of zoom out here, I should have a very nice tileable texture. At least that edge seam on the side. Now there's still some texture, there's some elements here that still repeat, right? So this is not going to be a perfect tile. So if I kind of repeat this now, you can see some of those areas do repeat, like that little crack there. We're starting to see that quite a bit. This little blotch, splotch here, that's going to be a problem. So what we can do is we can actually continue to adjust this, right? So we do have the ability to control it. Now what I'm doing is I'm baking in the tiling, so I am just going to go ahead and repeat this. So it's still at a 1x1 tile within the viewer, but I've now tiled the texture 2x2. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix this a little bit more. So I'm going to load up another. We're going to do like a clone stamp, a clone patch, if you will. We'll drop that in there. And what I'm going to do is sample an area. So if I hold V, I can sample a pixel, and then I can just kind of paint out. So if I want to just kind of remove that. Now, that's probably not the best example, right? Because I just kind of put that in a really bad spot. So let's load that back in. And let's paint out this area. So I'm just going to sample about right here, and then just kind of paint this out. Now that line is not lining up, so let's see what we can do to kind of clean that up. So I can have the same controls with that threshold, the smoothness here. I want that to line up even better. So let's go ahead and resample. And just kind of redraw this. Actually, we'll delete that and try again. The clone patch is definitely not my favorite tool to work with. It's a bit, always a pain to delete those sometimes. Anytime you want to make an adjustment, you're going to have to do it like one clone patch at a time. So like these lines here, that would actually be an easier adjustment. So if I just kind of, again, I'll just kind of paint that line out. That didn't do it. I did it again. I deleted it. Oh. There we are. So now I can just remove this line here. And it should be gone. All right. And then I can, again, play with my threshold. Kind of get that looking the way I want it. Blur it. Grid resolution. Beautiful. And I can see this in real time over here as well. So it looks like we have another line that we could potentially remove too. I'm not going to worry too much about it. It's just kind of something I want to show you that you can kind of fix it. What we can also do is add some color variation too, if we want to kind of color remap this. So let's actually just go back to our 3D view now. So right now it's doing 10 colors. And what I can do now is just put in custom colors. So if I wanted to do like a darker version of this concrete, I can absolutely do that. Create a little bit more contrast there. So it's essentially remapping it based off these values, right? Do you have to? Yeah, it's just, again, more control. All right, so we're not getting a whole lot of roughness variation. Let's go ahead and add a new one. We'll do the adjustment layer. So this one's kind of nice too. This is going to allow us to kind of recompute some of this information. So we've made a lot of changes throughout, and I kind of want to make sure all of it is updating. I can also run like a sharpness filter. So if I want to kind of kick up the intensity or the quality of the image a little bit, sometimes I'll do like a post sharpen. But I can also go into the roughness and glossiness. I can kind of play with the contrast here and make this a little bit more obvious. So if I want like just a much drier concrete, we can do that as well. I'll go with something like this perhaps. I can go into my ambient occlusion. I can recompute this based off new information. And again, I can kind of really pull that back. That's still quite strong. And so on. So we've made a texture, and if I don't like that color variation, I can turn it off. All right, but actually, yeah, I don't like it. It's gone. In fact, I'm just gonna delete that layer. All right, so we have our adjustments. We've made a texture. Now we can do whatever we want with this. So if I want to save this out, we'll call this stone wall. It's going to add it to our collection. And now we can do the same things we've done before. So if I wanted to kind of build off of this even further, maybe I want to kind of build up some dirt. I can absolutely do that. I can drag the dirt on there. I can do dust. Not dirt again, but dust. Pull back on the quantity. And again, this would look a lot better with a much higher resolution image. So I'm only working with what I have. But based off all of that new height data, I can have all of this information kind of build up on itself. And I get some cool effects where the dirt kind of builds up in the crevices. And I do still have, if I want to make this even more intense, no, definitely not. So again, really, really cool stuff. I wonder what the moss would look like. It's probably gonna be very heavy-handed. No, actually it wasn't too bad. Beautiful. It's a work of art. So let's go ahead and save this out. So we will also save this. So we'll go ahead and create, actually save as. And now let's go ahead and just export this. So we have a collection of materials. I don't want this one. We can get rid of that. The slate, that can go. We don't need that. And now we have these several materials, right? And so what we can do is just kind of export the ones we want. So we've got the generic stone wall here. We'll export this one. So we'll click on this little export button. We can export the current view. We can do basically either textures if we wanted to go straight into Maya or another package, or in this case, I can actually compile this into a shader. So I can output this at a much higher resolution. I'll put it on the desktop. We'll just say like stone wall. We'll let that process. Meanwhile, we'll open up Painter. Let's load in a material or an object that we can work on. Meet Matte. It does take a little while to kind of export, so you got to give it some time to cook. In the meantime, we'll also do the dirty matte here. We'll export this. Export current view. Same idea, 4K should be fine. Oh yeah, it's cooking. I believe in you, computer. I believe in you. Well, hopefully it's still going. But once that is all said and done, I wish this was like a cooking show. I wish I had that kind of pre-built and it could be like drag and drop, look. But I do not. So we wait painfully. All right, the stone wall's done. Cool. Let's go ahead and import this asset. Should be on my desktop. Stone wall, SBSAR. Again, I could do textures as well. I don't necessarily have to do an SBSAR, but the cool thing is if I do this particular extension, this archive, I can take this into any application that supports Substance. And so if I were going to V-Ray, it'll convert the maps as necessary. If I'm going to RenderMan, it'll convert the maps as necessary. So you can technically use the Substance plugin in Maya and convert your textures the way you need to. I just showed you the hard way though, so you understand it. Stone wall. import the current session. We'll let that load up. And there is our brand new material. And I can drag it to my object. Now, obviously, I'm going to have to probably repeat this not 31 times, but something like that. Height, definitely a little too strong from what I like. But again, since this is, Painter, I can still modify all of these parameters. Now, this is kind of what I have here. So I don't have like a technical information, but what I can do is just simply modify the height intensity in here. So I could just take that setting way, way down, make that a lot more subtle. And then I can do whatever I want with this. If I wanted to blend another material in there, absolutely be my guest. You can do that. So let's see, is this one exported yet? Get stuck on number 9. What is 9? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, that's not how that's calculated. Yeah, I have no idea what exporting 9 of 11 is. These files will get a little bit bigger too, so just watch out for that. So we'll load in the new one. Import this. Oh, did I do base material? I don't think I imported it correctly. Base material, current session. Whoop, there we are. And I can also load this in there and get that to look nice. Now this is gonna up-res and down-res based off the quality of the document. So if I kick this up to 4K, you're gonna see that's looking way, way, way better. And then of course I can go in and adjust all the same parameters. So if I want to have my actual tessellation kick in, I can increase the scale here. I can increase the quality of that tessellation and it will work. Down here it should be a lot more subtle. Still doing it. It's working. And there we go. Beautiful. That is exactly what I wanted it to be. Couldn't ask for better.